Sandra arrived in the city on a Tuesday afternoon in early October with one large suitcase, $40 in her wallet, and the kind of determination that only comes from having absolutely nothing to fall back on. She had grown up in a small town 3 hours away, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your business, and your mother's business. She had spent the better part of her 20s quietly planning her escape. Not from anything dramatic. Just from the smallness of it. The way the ceiling felt lower every year. The way her dreams kept pressing against the walls with nowhere to go. Claire had been her closest friend since they were 15, sharing a desk in a geography class neither of them cared about. They had stayed close through everything, different universities, different cities, different versions of themselves. When Sandra finally decided she was ready to move, Claire told her to come without a moment's hesitation. She had a spare room, a comfortable apartment, and a generous spirit. The apartment was warm and well kept. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, a kitchen with actual counter space. Claire worked in marketing and had a settled, ordered life. She introduced Sandra to colleagues, helped her rebuild her resume, drove her to interviews, and waited in nearby coffee shops with her laptop while Sandra sat across from strangers trying to convince them she was worth hiring. Within 4 months, Sandra had a job at a mid-sized design firm. Within 6, she had paid back a good portion of what she owed Claire for food and rent. Within a year, she felt, for the first time in her adult life, like she was actually building something solid. She was grateful in the way that people are when someone catches them at their lowest and does not let them fall completely. Fully, and without reservation, she trusted Claire with everything. Her fears, her hopes, her money worries. Her journal entries read aloud at 2 in the morning. Her deepest embarrassments. She told Claire things she had never said to another human being. And Claire received every word with warmth and patience and the particular kind of steady attention that makes a person feel truly seen. Sandra was a romantic, genuinely, wholeheartedly, and sometimes painfully so. She believed in love the way some people believe in gravity. Not because someone told her to, but because she had felt the pull of it and could not imagine living as though it was not real. She wanted a partner. A person to build something with. Someone who would stay and choose her every single day without her having to ask. That was the dream, and she was patient with it, right up until patience stopped being enough. Marcus came first. Sandra met him at a work event in the spring. He was standing near the drinks table with the mild, uncertain expression of someone who had arrived alone and was not entirely sure why. Sandra walked over because she had always hated watching people look lost at parties. He had a warm laugh and an easy, unhurried way of talking, and by the end of the evening they had exchanged numbers and made a loose plan for coffee. The coffee became dinner. The dinner became long phone calls that stretched past midnight. For 3 weeks, Marcus was attentive in the way that made Sandra both careful and reckless at the same time. He remembered small things she mentioned in passing. He checked in without prompting. He made her genuinely laugh, which was not as common as people assumed it should be. She told Claire she liked him. She said it carefully, like someone placing something fragile on a high shelf. But she said it. Claire smiled, refilled her coffee, and said all the right things. Be careful. Take your time. Don't get ahead of yourself. Her voice was warm. Her eyes were unreadable. On a Monday morning 3 weeks in, Sandra reached for her phone to reply to Marcus's usual morning message and found nothing. No message. No explanation. She checked their thread, scrolled back through the conversation looking for something she might have missed, and found only the last thing she had sent him, a meme about bad Mondays, sitting there unanswered, unreceived by anyone who was still listening. By noon, she had been blocked on all platforms. Not a word. Not a goodbye. As though she had simply ceased to exist for him somewhere between Sunday night and Monday morning. Claire came. She held her while she cried and said everything a good friend is supposed to say. Then, 3 days later, when the worst of it had passed and Sandra was sitting at the kitchen table staring at her coffee, Claire suggested the prayer house. A colleague had mentioned it. She said it had helped someone with a similar kind of problem. It was worth trying. They went. Sandra was desperate enough to go anywhere. The prayer house was tucked inside a converted building on a quiet side street. It smelled of incense and old carpet. The man who received them had a calm, authoritative voice and a full page of instructions for Sandra to follow. He collected his fee in cash and told her to be hopeful. They went home. Nothing changed. Daniel came second, arriving in Sandra's life like a second chance dressed in ordinary clothes. He was a friend of a colleague, quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke and asked follow-up questions, which meant he had actually been paying attention. Sandra found that immediately refreshing after Marcus's easy, surface-level charm. Daniel did not try too hard. He simply showed up and was himself. And for a while, that felt like enough.
2 months passed, easy months. Sandra began to relax in small, cautious ways. She stopped bracing for the end of every conversation. She stopped editing herself before she spoke. She started, carefully and with great internal resistance, to believe that this one might actually last. Then one Tuesday evening, her phone lit up with his name and a message 6 words long. He needed space. Please do not contact him. He was sorry. That was the entire message. No call, no explanation, no door left even slightly ajar. Sandra sat on her bed holding her phone and felt something inside her shift into a kind of numb stillness that was in some ways worse than crying. There was no argument, no misunderstanding, no moment she could point to and say, that was where it went wrong. He had simply decided, quietly and without warning, to disappear. Claire was there within an hour. She held her. She said the right things. She stayed until Sandra was calmer. Then, a few days later, she suggested a prophet she had heard about from someone at work. This one was said to deal specifically with what Claire called relationship patterns, cycles of loss that people could not seem to break on their own. Sandra was exhausted and fragile and out of better ideas. The prophet was theatrical in a way that would have made Sandra laugh in another version of her life. He prayed loudly and at length. He spoke in 3 languages. He gave Sandra a small bottle of oil and a list of morning prayers and collected his fee with the satisfied air of a man who had done good work. Claire sat beside Sandra throughout, her hand resting on Sandra's arm, her expression attentive and concerned. Nothing changed. James was the one that truly hurt. He arrived in her life like something Sandra had been asking for without knowing how to say it. He was warm in the way that felt real rather than performed. A walk to pick up groceries became an hour-long conversation about fear and ambition and the strange comfort of routines. He met her friends and they liked him immediately. He spoke about the future using words like we and us so naturally and so often that Sandra barely noticed how much had shifted, until one evening she caught herself mentally rearranging her apartment to include him and laughed at herself for how far ahead she had gone. Nearly 3 months. The longest stretch yet. The most settled she had felt. She told Claire she thought this might genuinely be it. Claire listened carefully, nodded, and said it was still early. She told Sandra not to move too fast. Her voice was gentle and her concern seemed genuine. Sandra let it go. 3 weeks later, James called her on an evening when she was still at her desk. She answered, smiling. The sound of his voice immediately told her something was wrong. He apologized before he explained. He said he could not continue seeing her. He said something did not feel right and he did not know how to explain it. He said he was sorry again and again, his voice genuinely unsteady, and then the line went dead before Sandra could ask a single question. She sat at her desk for a very long time without moving. She did not eat dinner that night. She did not eat breakfast the next morning. On the second day, Claire arrived with food, sat beside her on the bed, and held her with the kind of quiet, steady presence that Sandra had come to depend on so completely she had stopped thinking to question it. Claire was always there. Every time. Right after every fall. As though she had been standing nearby the whole time, ready. Sandra felt nothing but gratitude. Ryan walked into Sandra's life 6 months after James. 6 months was approximately how long it had taken her to stop flinching every time she got close to someone new. She met him through a mutual acquaintance at a small gathering, the kind of low-key evening where nobody was trying too hard and the conversations were long and unhurried. He worked in cybersecurity. He had the habit of listening to everything all the way through before he responded, which Sandra found quietly remarkable in a world where most people were already planning their reply before you had finished speaking. He was funny without performing it. Present without making it obvious he was trying to be. She liked him immediately. Then spent 2 weeks telling herself she didn't. She mentioned him to Claire, the way a person mentions something they are trying not to think about, too casually, too often. Claire asked about him with the easy interest of a good friend. But the interest went slightly too deep. The question slightly too specific. She asked about his job, his schedule, where he lived, how often he and Sandra were meeting up. Sandra answered without thinking much of it. Claire had always taken an interest in the people in her life. That was just who Claire was. Ryan kept showing up, not aggressively, not in the practiced way of someone executing a strategy, simply in the way of a person who meant what he said and showed up when he said he would. Consistently and without fanfare. Sandra kept him firmly in the friend zone and told herself she was being sensible, even as she noticed that she smiled differently in the hours before she was going to see him. One evening, he had been approached on his way to his car after a late work night. 2 men. They had not robbed him. They were calm and specific and deliberate. They knew his name. They knew Sandra's name. They knew where he worked. And they told him plainly that getting close to Sandra would be something he would regret. One of them had a tattoo on his forearm, a scorpion, dark and detailed, with the word "Sting Fast" written in block letters beneath it. Ryan told Sandra this with his eyes watching her face carefully, measuring her reaction. Sandra was shaken. She could not imagine who would do such a thing or why. She had no enemies that she knew of. They sat with the mystery of it and came up with nothing. Ryan did not disappear. He was rattled, but he stayed. And in staying, he did the one thing Sandra had learned not to expect from anyone. He also started paying closer attention to everything around him, the way his training had always taught him to do when something did not add up. He noticed that Claire asked unusually detailed questions about his schedule whenever Sandra mentioned him. He noticed that 2 of the men Sandra had previously dated had described, each in vague terms on old social media posts, being warned or frightened of in ways they could not explain. He noticed the pattern assembling itself, piece by careful piece. And he kept what he was thinking to himself while he waited for something concrete. The something concrete arrived on a Thursday afternoon.
Ryan was at the mall picking up a replacement part for his workstation, moving through the quieter end of the electronics section, when he turned a corner and stopped. 3 meters away, standing near a shelf without any apparent interest in its contents, was one of the men who had threatened him. The scorpion tattoo was visible below a rolled sleeve. Sting fast. Ryan's instincts moved faster than his conscious mind. He stepped back behind the nearest shelf, angled himself so he could see without being seen, and watched. The man was not shopping. He was waiting. After a few minutes, a figure came from the direction of the escalators. Ryan shifted his angle carefully to get a clear look. His stomach dropped. It was Claire. She walked up to the man with the easy, unbothered manner of someone meeting a contractor for a routine update, comfortable, practiced, unremarkable. Ryan had his phone recording before he made the conscious decision to do it. He held it steady, stayed completely still, and listened. Claire's voice came through clearly in the quiet of that section of the mall. She asked if it was done. The man confirmed that Ryan had been dealt with and would not be going near Sandra. She asked if he had been careful, whether Ryan had seen his face clearly. The man said they had been careful. Claire reached into her bag and handed him an envelope. He pocketed it without counting it. They parted ways without making eye contact again, with the practiced, unhurried ease of 2 people who had done this more than once. Ryan stood behind the shelf for a full minute after they both walked away. He did not move. He did not speak. He just stood there in the quiet of the electronics aisle while the recording ran and then ended, and the implications of what he had just witnessed settled over him like something cold and irreversible. Then he called Sandra and told her he was coming over. The recording played and none of them moved. Claire's voice came through the phone speaker with perfect clarity. Every word landed in the silence of Sandra's living room without softening. The confirmation. The payment. The calm, transactional ease of a thing routinely done. When it ended, the room was so quiet that the sound of a car passing outside felt like an intrusion. Sandra looked at Ryan. Then she looked at Claire. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked whether that was Claire's voice on the recording. It was not a question, not really. It was the last moment before a door closed permanently. But she asked it anyway. Claire sat completely still. The composure she had maintained for years, the careful warmth, the measured responses, came down quietly and completely in that moment. She did not reach for a denial or an excuse. She simply said yes. Sandra asked about Marcus. Claire said yes. Daniel. Yes. James. Yes. And then the full weight of it arrived, not in pieces, but all at once. Claire confessed everything. She told Sandra about the men she had paid to approach and frighten away, not just Ryan, but Marcus before him, Daniel, James, and others Sandra barely remembered now. Each one driven off in ways that had been made to look coincidental or inexplicable. She told her about the prayer houses she had suggested, knowing with complete certainty that they would not work, because she had needed Sandra to keep feeling like she was the problem. She told her about the prophets, chosen and suggested for the same reason, to keep Sandra circling in the same hopeless pattern, spending money and energy on solutions to a problem that Claire herself was creating. And underneath all of it, the root of everything, the secret she had been carrying alone since they were 22 years old. She was in love with Sandra. She had always been in love with Sandra. She had watched every relationship form and made the calculated decision each time to end it before Sandra could become too attached. She had been waiting through all of it, through every prayer house and every prophet and every early morning when Sandra could not get out of bed, for Sandra to be broken enough by men to finally consider something different. To finally consider her. Sandra sat completely still through all of it. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. She absorbed it the way a person absorbs news that they will not fully feel until later, when they are alone. When Claire finished, Sandra stood up from the couch. She moved slowly and deliberately, like someone navigating a room they no longer recognized. She walked to her bedroom door and then stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back. She told Claire that she believed her. That she could see the love in what Claire was saying. That she had probably always seen it, even when she told herself she was imagining things. But she also told her clearly and without cruelty that love does not do this. Love does not burn everything around the person it claims to protect just to be the last one left standing. That was not love. That was obsession. And Sandra deserved better than that. Claire deserved better than what that kind of love had made her. Claire's face crumpled. Sandra went to her room and packed her bags. She did not slam drawers. She did not throw things. She moved through the familiar space with a terrible quietness, folding clothes and placing them carefully into her suitcase. The care of it, the precision, made everything feel more final than anger would have. Claire appeared in the doorway. She begged. She apologized. She said she had done it out of love, that Sandra had to understand that she had not known how else to hold on. Sandra stopped what she was doing and turned to face her one last time. She spoke quietly and without raising her voice and told her everything she needed to say. Then she turned back to her suitcase. She called Ryan from her room and asked if he could help her find somewhere to stay that night. He said yes without a single unnecessary question. She wheeled her suitcase through the living room. Claire was on the couch with her face in her hands, her shoulders moving with the kind of crying that makes no sound. Sandra paused at the front door. She told Claire that she was grateful, genuinely, fully grateful, for everything Claire had done when she first arrived in the city with nothing. She said she had not forgotten it and would not forget it. And then she said she could not stay. She closed the door behind her. The hallway was bright and quiet. Ryan was standing at the elevator with his hands in his pockets. He looked at her suitcase and then at her face and said nothing that was not necessary. They left together. The weeks that followed were not easy, and Sandra did not pretend they were. She moved into a short-term rental and spent the first few nights lying awake, going back through every memory she had of Claire. Every held hand. Every prayer house. Every morning Claire had shown up with food. She turned each one over in new light and tried to understand what was real and what was theater. The answer she arrived at, slowly and with a kind of exhausted honesty, was that most of it was both. Claire had genuinely loved her in the only way Claire knew how to love. And that love, held in secret for too long and twisted by fear and obsession into something unrecognizable, had caused real and lasting harm. That did not cancel the harm. But it helped Sandra breathe. She thought about Claire often in those early weeks, not with hatred, which surprised her, but with something more complicated. Grief and pity and a sadness she could not find a clean name for. She was not ready to reach out and she was honest enough with herself to know it. She let the distance stand. Ryan texted every day. Short messages. Nothing demanding. He checked in on her. He sent her something funny he had seen. He asked whether she had eaten. It was the kind of ordinary, patient consistency that Sandra had spent years hoping to find, and had been quietly and systematically prevented from having. And now that it was just there, available and real and unhurried, she found she did not quite know what to do with it. She told him she was scared. She said it plainly, without softening it, because she was done with the performance of being fine. She told him about the years of feeling cursed. About the prayer houses and the prophets and the particular humiliation of having paid for hope that someone she trusted had deliberately ensured would not materialize. He listened to all of it without interrupting or trying to fix it. He did not tell her how to feel. He did not rush the timeline. He stayed, every single day, in all the ordinary ways that accumulate into something enormous if you pay attention. Sandra did not fall into him. That would have been too easy. And she was done with easy things. She let it grow slowly, the trust rebuilt piece by careful piece in the same painstaking way that things broken all the way down can only ever be rebuilt. She was still carrying the weight of what she had discovered. Still processing what years of careful manipulation had done to her sense of herself. But she was also, gradually and almost without noticing, starting to believe again. Months passed. The anger softened into something cleaner. The fear became smaller. The mornings grew easier. They were sitting together on a bench in a small park near Sandra's new apartment on a Thursday evening in late autumn. She looked at him and told him that she used to genuinely believe she was cursed. She said it without embarrassment, without deflecting it into a joke the way she might have 6 months ago. She told him she had spent real money on that belief, had built her understanding of herself around it, had walked through years of her life convinced that love was simply something that passed over her. Ryan looked back at her and told her she had never been cursed. She had simply been surrounded by the wrong people. The wrong men, yes, but more than that, she had been surrounded by help that had its own agenda. By devotion that was really possession. By a friendship that was really a cage, built so carefully and with such apparent love that Sandra had never once thought to test the walls. She had never been broken. She had never been the problem. She had simply been in an environment designed, by someone who claimed to love her, to keep breaking things around her before they had a chance to grow. Sandra held that for a long time. Then she leaned into him, and his arm came around her, warm and steady and without conditions. She exhaled the kind of breath that carries much more than air. The amber light faded into blue. Neither of them moved to leave. She had never been cursed. She had never been too much or not enough. She had simply been, for a long time, looking in the wrong direction for proof that she was worthy of love. She always was.